Last time on the Racist States of America, we explained how the US got racist. Here are some highlights in case you forgot or didn't see it. The United States is deeply divided on all racial lines. White folks must disarm the trigger pulled by naming their race. We are white in white America living a white American experience. These are simple truths. Any discomfort indicates white fragility is present. White folks have strong opinions about race and racism with little to no information and few, if any, cross-racial relationships. White folks not only misunderstand race and racism, but also do not understand how to socialize across racial lines. Uncomfortable? That's your white fragility again. White folks, none of this is your fault. It is far larger than that, but fixing it is our collective responsibility. Systemic racism forced me to act without my knowledge or consent, as do every white person's. Overcoming indoctrination is a pursuit, not an event, especially when the indoctrination is constant and white fragility prevents its examination. You do not have to watch that video before seeing this one, but you will get more out of this video if you do. There's a link right up there. Let's discuss how the US stays racist and what we can do about it. Roll the intro. Malcolm X said this about progressing on racism.
I will never say that progress is being made. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6 inches, there's no progress.
Combating racism requires dispelling individuality and colorblindness myths. White folks must see ourselves as a collective sharing a history of racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination. As white folks do this and stop speaking about people of color as if they are one collective group, the stereotypes, the biases about blacks, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, and others vary and must be addressed separately. I'll pull the conversation back to black folks, not to minimize other groups' racist scars, but rather to honor their differences. I am constantly, continuously, and relentlessly bombarded with negative racial stereotypes. They affect me in ways I cannot see without effort. I do not feel them when with black friends. Alone, on a dark street, and a black man approaches, the stereotypes flood my brain with adrenaline and bam! Fight, flight, or freeze. Messages born of white folks' need to justify racial enslavement of black folks physically harm me. They cause an autonomic response I must fight through before I can suppress my white fragility. White and denying this applies to you? Why do you think over 500 years of de jure and de facto racism can be overcome in just 61 years? Black folks have been characterized as lazy and childlike while doing the back-breaking work white folks would not. Black men have been characterized as hypersexual brutes attacking white women. Black women is always ready, which was just a justification for white men raping them. Today, black folks are characterized as dangerous criminals inverting racial violence's direction in the United States. Knowing this is all false does not make it go away. Bias normally operates unconsciously. Black folks have been discriminated against in the hiring process since slavery's end. The government attempted to address this with affirmative action, and white folks got pissed.
Nothing, it's just, it's everywhere I look now. What? This affirmative blaction.
White folks like to pretend that loss of privilege is oppression and invent nonsensical terms like reverse racism. Do you believe any of the following about affirmative action? Black folks must be hired over white folks. Black folks are given preference in hiring. A quota exists for hiring black folks. These are all incorrect. Affirmative action simply ensures someone from an underrepresented population is given fair consideration based on qualifications. White women actually benefited the most. Affirmative action means reasons for not hiring an underrepresented person must exist without mention of their social group. It only applied to governmental positions and contractors, not all private companies. Affirmative action was slowly dismantled until President Trump did away with almost all DEI programs. The school-to-prison pipeline, mass incarceration, and white flight attest to white folks' collective disdain for black folks. Listen to polls of white folks. We do not want to live in neighborhoods that are more than 30% black. If you watch us, about 12% black population triggers white flight. When surrounding property values become unaffordable, gentrification pushes black folks back out. Look at Brooklyn, Harlem, Oakland, or Seattle.
Having your eyes tested may clear things up.
Now I know.
And knowing is half the battle.
White and black folks have the highest level of segregation. Asians and whites are the lowest, and Latinx and whites are in the middle. White folks do not want to integrate, as their practices demonstrate. A black teen is thrown across a classroom. A black kindergartner is handcuffed. A black child shot while playing with a toy gun in a park. White folks are quick to retort, "They deserved it!" If those were white children, white folks would scream for blood, and lynchings quite probably would ensue. Absurd comparisons of white nationalists to 1960s Black Panthers happen all the time. The president equates neo-Nazis with their protesters. Black folks organize and yell Black Lives Matter. White folks respond with all or Blue Lives Matter. All examples of anti-blackness. Tanisha Paul Coates in The Case for Reparations includes the early American economy was built on slave labor. The Capitol and the White House were built by slaves. President James K. Polk traded slaves from the Oval Office. The laments about black pathology, the criticism of black family structures by pundits and intellectuals ring hollow in a country whose existence was predicated on the torture of black fathers, on the rape of black mothers, on the sale of black children. An honest assessment of America's relationship to the black family reveals the country to be not its nurturer, but its destroyer. And this destruction did not end with slavery. I was not taught any of that in school. Were you? Fables, projections, and lies, ideological pillars supporting anti-blackness. Signs on the door read, "No history here. History does not stain race relations," and I refuse to see the stain. The trauma in black folks from centuries of open physical, mental, and emotional abuse levied by white folks is as obvious as the atrocities. And this next paragraph does not end where you would expect it to. White supremacy levied trauma hidden to us on white folks. Cross-racial relationships are hampered by it. Fear in the presence of unknown black folks breeding distrust. Stereotypes emerge, complicating personal race relations. Racist phrases threaten cross-racial relationships. White folks' trauma as they attempt to overcome white supremacy holds the evil in place. Look, a bunch of white folks enjoying a summer's night. Except this photo is doctored. This is the original. They are celebrating the lynching of 2 black teens in Marion, Indiana on August 7th, 1930. White folks scream for white opioid crisis victims' release, while caterwauling for incarcerating black crack epidemic victims. It's just a modern version of the white audience's glee at black-faced apes in vaudeville. itself a modernization of antebellum cartoons of black folks. It's all the same rotten apple pie. Impoverished black folks belong there, and impoverished white folks claim wage slavery. White supremacy's specter haunts every white person. To be white, its opposite must exist. White privilege demands black oppression. Coates succinctly refers to whites as dreamers in the dream. White identity requires black inferiority. This is the basis of race and racism white folks must overcome. It's why we don't deserve a White History Month or a white anything else.
Hell, it's about time.
Collectively, white folks hate blackness. It reminds us how atrociously we can, have, and do behave. My pursuit to kill my personal racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination means nothing without the willingness to confront others about theirs. Because, and in spite of, my risk and embarrassment associated with it, I am quite simply sick of white folks' bullshit. In the 1980s, I heard,
The single mother living in a blighted area of your town with more mouths to feed than an Ethiopian soup kitchen.
I was too young to understand what was being said, and in the 1990s, Rage Against the Machine sang,
So those that work forces gonna sing that work right.
I got the point and missed the implications. In the 2000s, I watched
Fear and distrust of Muslims persists in the United States.
Numbed to atrocity by the catalyst's horror. In the 2010s, I was dumbfounded.
America was built by and for the white Christian people of this nation. I came here to speak on behalf of Donald Trump.
In the late 20-teens, I was silent. In 2025, watching the late 20-teens repeat with a vengeance, I am speaking up and calling bullshit on the collective silence of white folks, and fuck any white person who doesn't. White folks assuage our guilt by playing the benevolent benefactor to poor black folks. The stories incorporate negative stereotypes of black folks. In The Blind Side, a white family adopts a black teen, Michael Big Mike, or they support his dreams. He becomes an NFL star. You remember, Big Mike is portrayed as a simple-minded, gentle giant. Come on, you know, Big Mike scores low in ability to learn, but off the charts in protective instinct, a non-existent metric. Really, bro? Or is portrayed as so dumb he can't understand football's rules. So they play to his protective instinct. Seriously, every single black character portrays negative black stereotypes. Dude, really, it was a true story with Sandra Bullock. Yeah, that one! In interviews, Michael Orr presents himself as well-spoken, thoughtful, and capable of understanding the nuances of complex legal issues. But this is what we call a true story. It is told from the white perspective, which effectively hides its real message. Most white folks didn't even notice. Their white fragility made sure of that. The Tories encounter racist white folks portrayed as bad. The false good-bad binary is reinforced. White folks are a boiling cauldron of conflicting feelings about black folks with an unsecured lid. The slightest bump dislodges the lid, showing these feelings normally hidden by coded language. This creates anti-blackness. Even black friends walk on eggshells to avoid our white rage. Let's talk about how black folks can bump that cauldron. Remember white folks' protective ideologies from earlier? These feelings become defenses, creating policies that maintain white supremacy. Most white folks know little of systemic racism. Their racial discourse is limited to a single college class or mandatory training at work. Both likely use coded language like urban, inner city, or disadvantage and refrain from words like white, overadvantaged, or privileged. These classes and trainings reproduce racist images and perspectives, making race minorities a problem. If a class or training takes on racism headlong, white folks disengage, shut down, or get angry. White folks exclude themselves, claiming, I had a class on this, or I already know this. This is white fragility reducing white folks' stamina for racial discomfort.
Remember, never get in anything that could close up and trap you.
Now we know.
And knowing is half the battle.
A racial equity class or training that does not result in white folks taking action against racism is completely useless. Anthropologist Pierre Bourdieu gives us 3 terms essential to understanding white fragility. They are field, which is the space I'm in, habitus, the reflexes I and you are taught as normal, and capital, which is how my whiteness spends in this room. Which is why simply being myself can be racially problematic. Field is the amount of control you have at home versus at work.
Ronald McDonald and friends in the Hamburgly Touch.
On a very bad day, McDonald's made my sandwich wrong. I went inside where I was the only white person. I asked for the manager and was told to wait in line. I went off. I already waited in line and got a messed up sandwich. I was not nice. The poor employee looked past me, embarrassed for me, to the other black folks. One black woman spoke up. "My N-word! Get in the back of the line! You're holding everyone up!" My habitus interrupted. I did as that woman said, and I would thank her today if I could. Capital is your likelihood to protect your white fragility in a room of mostly black versus mostly white folks. Unfamiliar or capital challenging social cues cause disequilibrium in habitus, raising internal strategies to help regain balance. Strategies we've been indoctrinated into through free will and structural determination. Which brings us, finally, to the definition of white fragility. White fragility is a state where the smallest challenge to our habitus is intolerable, resulting in defensive postures.
Oh, no, he didn't.
Postures including emotional and behavioral responses, anger, fear, and guilt, or argumentation, silence, and leaving the room. The challenges include breaking racial taboos, people of color not protecting white folks' feelings, a white person breaking white solidarity, suggesting group membership is important, a person of color in a leadership role, suggesting the white experience is not universal. White supremacist societies make these exceptional challenges to white fragility. They leave white folks without programmed responses. Very recently, we saw several cultural icons challenged as racist. Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben's, and Cream of Wheat's Black Chef, Mrs. Butterworth's Bottle, Eskimo Pie's Name, and Land O'Lakes' Indigenous Princess, Trader Joe's racist label variants, and Red Man chewing tobacco, Latinx instead of Latino for the group name. White folks either have or have seen others challenge the seriousness of these claims. White folks still say things like, "I'm glad I don't get upset about pancake syrup." These dismissals reinforce white fragility. They dismiss objections as silly or lump black folks into a false monolith of opinion. They demonstrate white folks not knowing when to shut up. White fragility says removing privilege is oppression. White folks' conditioned responses rage like stampeding cattle, trampling voices of non-whites and silencing the opposition. Let's take on white fragility headlong. Has someone in a position of power over you interrupted you? How did that feel? Now think, have you ever interrupted a black person? Do you realize that whites are always in a position of power over blacks in the society we live in? White fragility keeps you from realizing this. In a training where I was presented with this image and asked if I saw anything racially problematic, I did not. The trainers explained all the bad kids are black. I felt like I was being called racist for not noticing race. A challenge to my colorblind ideology indoctrination. I incredulously asked if not noticing race made me racist. No answer was provided, and I disengaged because I have white fragility too. In 2018, 55% of whites felt racism against whites existed. In 2025, it is down to 45%. Malcolm X and I do not call that progress. Racism is systemic, and white folks control the system. Those 45% admit to having not personally experienced racism, but they know someone who did. That being said, a black person or organization can racially discriminate against white folks. And it's perfectly acceptable. We need to overcome our white fragility.
How do you think I feel?
To paraphrase communications professor Judith Martin, white U.S. children inherit their white supremacist society's morality. Race-based advantages are fair and normal. Little relevant education is provided. Prevention guidance is even more rare. White children experience racial tension without understanding we created and perpetuated. White folks deny our societal structure is white supremacists. But as I write this, the news is reporting that the Trump administration is sending ICE to the Super Bowl because the Puerto Rican Bad Bunny is headlining the halftime show. Government officials claim he is un-American. Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, but they're brown. This is a white supremacist society. Progressive white folks vociferously speak against racism and deny race-based privileges. This denial reinforces racial discrimination. White folks' moral objections increase resistance to acknowledge their complicity. Our white identity is built on superficial tolerance and acceptance, which props up white supremacy. We liberal white folks defend our reputations instead of attacking racism, which is white fragility. Hey, white folks, do you feel defensive, confused, or righteously indignant about white privilege? Yeah, me too.
Another one bites the dust.
These feelings only protect white privilege. It is my job to break them. One feeling is self-defense. White folks feel victimized, blamed, and attacked. A response to the counter-narrative. Racial violence does not erupt in modern racial sensitivity trainings or classes. These claims position the speaker as morally superior, obscure actual social power, and blame the less fortunate while implying discomfort is dangerous. Victimized white folks cannot be the aggressor. Victimized white folks can demand undue resources. This is white fragility distorting reality to protect racism and white supremacy. White folks constantly yell about feeling unsafe, which grossly distorts the historical direction of racial violence in this country. It demonstrates just how fragile our whiteness is. On colorblind racism, sociologist Eduardo Bonilla Silva states, because the new racial climate in America forbids the open expression of racially based feelings, views, and positions, when whites discuss issues that make them uncomfortable, they become almost incomprehensible. He's calling out our digressions, pauses, repetitions, and self-corrections when expressing views without sounding racist or breaking taboos. Most white folks don't like this. If a black or brown person tells you something was racist, it was. Period. Intentions do not matter. Excuses that hide racial bias do not matter. Your words and or actions were racist. If you don't understand why, ask and listen to the answer for fucking once. You don't respond this way because it challenges your white equilibrium, which is a cocoon of racial comfort, centrality, superiority, entitlement, racial apathy, and obliviousness, all rooted in an identity of being good people, free of racism, according to D'Angelo. Challenges are so rare, white folks don't know how to handle it. So we smack our child across the face instead of telling them exactly what the N-word means and why we don't use it. White fragility bullies people of color into silence. White fragility keeps people of color in their place. White fragility is racial control. Challenging our social power triggers white fragility with a vengeance specially designed to maintain the social order. Quote D'Angelo, white fragility is the sociology of dominance. There is no such thing as black fragility. Their complaints are valid. Ours are not. Now let's take a look at what white fragility looks like in action. Before discussing how white fragility looks, let's hear some comedians talk about race and racism.
I talk about race a lot in my act, which I know makes a lot of white people uncomfortable. Actually, you know what? It's not even the discussion of race that makes white people uncomfortable. It's just me using the phrase white people.
But then there's that thing that happens with white people who are your friends, who are on the left, and that thing where you go, hey, that thing happened, it was racism. They go, how'd you know it was racism?
He white, he could work anywhere. He chose
a Black History Museum. You know that job interview was a son of a bitch.
Right. So the idea being that in the North, you can be a black doctor, but don't move into my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Whereas in the South, they're like, I'd rather you live next to me than be a black doctor.
That means white man calls police on black woman using neighborhood pool becomes black woman calls police on white man using neighborhood pool. How do you like them reverse racist apples?
I am willing to bet that every white viewer did not laugh at one or more of those jokes. When we talk about laughing at ourselves, it doesn't include racism, because racist people are bad people, and acknowledging racism breaks white fragility. This is our white fragility in action. Let's discuss.
I talk about race a lot in my act, which I know makes a lot of white people uncomfortable. Actually, you know what? It's not even the discussion of race that makes white people uncomfortable. It's just me using the phrase white people.
Naming white folks race breaks notions of colorblindness and racial innocence. White folks possess race. Possessing race then equals racial accountability. White folks' racial accountability means being responsible for fixing racism. We are then guilty of perpetuating racism and white supremacy. Thus, naming white folks race is offensive, and we simply need to get over that.
But then there's that thing that happens with white people who are your friends, who are on the left, and that thing where you go, hey, I had a thing happen, it was racism. They go, how'd you know it was racism?
Camus demonstrates how we look when our indoctrination of the white perspective is universal causes improper phrasing of questions. The question, how do you know it was racism, sounds like he doesn't know what racism is. He equates it to asking how you know what pizza is. The question white folks ought to ask is, can you teach me how to identify racism in similar statements so I can better assuage my racial prejudices? We don't ask that because admitting we hold racial prejudices is admitting we are bad. White folks will not look like bad people. We need to tear down the false good, bad binary.
He white, he could work anywhere. He chose a Black History Museum. You know that job interview was a son of a bitch.
Many white viewers probably did not laugh at this. Roy states, he's white, he can work anywhere. Acknowledging this requires white folks admit their job options are unlimited and black folks are not. He continues, you know that job interview was a son of a bitch. He flips the script. He demonstrates racially discriminatory interview questions by pointing them at white folks. Laughing at this joke requires white acknowledgement of racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination. You must acknowledge this is how black folks are treated in interviews to laugh. White fragility busies us with saying, I don't act like that, which shuts down self-examination, perpetuating white fragility.
The idea being that in the North, you can be a black doctor, but don't move into my neighborhood.
Cameron was explaining it all saying, in the South, black folks can get close but not too high. In the North, black folks can get high but not too close. As a child, he moved between Boston and Alabama, which are very different and yet very similar. He explains that racism expressed differently is still racism. Acknowledging this truth requires abandoning the idea of geography exempting us from racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination. And growing up segregated makes us racially innocent. Laughing requires breaking white solidarity and calling out racial discrimination inherent to white fragility.
But like more lynchings are in the South than the North, correct?
Sure, yeah, no, I'm not talking about like...
Means white man calls police on black woman using neighborhood pool becomes black woman calls police
addressing
on
modern
white man
racism's
using neighborhood pool. How do you like them?
Let's conduct a thought experiment. You read the headline. White woman calls police on black child threatening son with toy knife. What is the police's response? You read the headline. Black woman calls police on white child threatening son with toy knife. What is the police's response? Earlier, I explained how I came to understand white privilege. I've told that story many times before. White folks say it's anecdotal and ignore that my friend didn't know that cop. White folks blame my friend's approach that they have no knowledge of. White folks claim the officer realized we were in the same car, and I seriously hope you're laughing at that one. No one has questioned if it happened, and that fact by itself betrays systemic racism in the United States. Many white folks are probably right now justifying their response to the clips they didn't laugh at. It's not funny to make fun of Christians. That man calling the cops was racist, but reversing it is just silly. Those are just jokes. Why make a big deal? Maybe you are commenting right now. That is your white fragility in action. And by the way, have you ever read The King's New Garments? I'm illustrating white folks' shared racist assumptions created by indoctrination into a white supremacist society. Challenging those assumptions creates predictable defenses. Be honest, have I accurately predicted your responses to racial bias, prejudice, discrimination, or racism? You cannot cogently deny your predictable emotions, actions, and protective claims. Short-circuiting white fragility requires examining its framework of assumptions. Assumptions like racism is personal prejudice, I am not racist, and racism can only be intentional. In White Fragility, D'Angelo lists 23 of them. These assumptions maintain white solidarity, shut down self-reflection, and trivialize racism. D'Angelo lists 8 more effects of these assumptions. These actions, attitudes, and behaviors functions to close off discussion, examination, and correction of white folks' racism. Our white fragility demands that others follow the rules of engagement. D'Angelo lists 11 rules of engagement which shut down talk of racism rather than promote it. Before discussing these rules of disengagement, remember bias, prejudice, and discrimination are personal. I use the terms this way. Racism and white supremacy are systemic issues, and I use these terms this way. This importantly highlights the absurdity of the rules. The cardinal rule of disengagement is, do not provide feedback on my racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination, ever. Period. Just STFU. White solidarity reinforces this. Breaking it normally results in white aggressors claiming victimization. The remaining rules explain means and methods white folks use to play the victim. Feedback must be free of emotion. Emotion victimizes me and invalidates the feedback. This blames the messenger instead of internalizing feedback and correcting the bias, prejudice, and/or discrimination displayed. You must trust that I hold no racial bias, prejudice, or discrimination before providing me with feedback on my racial bias, prejudice, or discrimination. We've already discussed how false statements demonstrate this. Unrelated issues in our relationship make claims of racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination invalid. This is deflection. It surfaces in statements like, "What about this completely unrelated time when you wronged me?" Only immediate feedback is valid. Any time lapse invalidates the feedback. Only offense egregious enough to demand immediate action is an offense. Also, this immediate feedback must be free from emotion and in no way imply that I hold racial bias, prejudice, or discrimination. Feedback must be private, otherwise the embarrassment and shame victimizes me. Feedback must be emotionless, private, immediate, and not imply I hold racial bias, prejudice, or discrimination. Offenses committed publicly cannot be criticized. Feedback must be indirect. Directly calling out what I did victimizes me. Explain how my actions showed racial bias, prejudice, or discrimination without telling me what I did, because that makes sense. As a white person, I must feel safe, and by safe, I mean comfortable. Tell me something. Have you ever, at any point in your life, felt comfortable being corrected? This rule of disengagement is particularly powerful. Highlighting my racial privilege invalidates any oppression I have suffered ever. Women have been oppressed, so therefore can't be racist. Homosexuals have been oppressed, so therefore can't be racist, and so on. In reality, black women suffer racism and misogyny. Black homosexuals suffer racism and homophobia. Suffering one form of oppression does not exempt a person from oppressing other people. My good intentions exempt all negative impact of my behaviors. So shooting you in the face to prevent suicide is a good thing, right? This is just dumb. Suggesting that my behavior portrayed negative racial bias, prejudice, or discrimination shows misunderstanding of my meaning. You must allow me to explain until you agree that you are wrong. You've seen this one before. It's the dude who cuts the other person off until they just give up. These rules bully the person calling out white folks' racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination into silence. They protect the racism and white supremacy our society is built on. They are the equivalent of a petulant child sticking their fingers in their ears and yelling, I can't hear you. D'Angelo suggests we replace these rules with 2 rules of engagement. I want your feedback. How, where, and when are irrelevant. If it is difficult for me to hear, that is my problem, not yours. And secondly, thank you. Now that we thoroughly understand white fragility in all its various aspects, let's discuss fixing the situation. I made this video because I incited an incident with a black man I've known for over 20 years. He posted about racism. I replied with the story about how I came to understand white privilege and white folks' normal responses. He explained what needed to be included in such discussions. I replied that I am unqualified to talk about how racism feels, and he is unqualified to talk about what will get through to white folks. I read White Fragility shortly after that, and by the time I was 3 chapters in, I sent him an apology. He did not respond, and I do not blame him. We do still communicate. Like Michael Jackson sang. Where? How? Start. The first step in undermining white fragility is a realization. There is no good, bad binary of racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination. Expressing racist ideology does not make me a bad person. Refusing to correct it does. The binary around racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination is knowledge versus ignorance, and ignorance is not bad if you admit to it and work on correcting it. Then we must short-circuit the emotional response. A simple concept, a difficult implementation. White fragility causes thought-stopping emotions. We must rewire that emotional response to feel gratitude, excitement, motivation, humility, compassion, and/or interest. This requires active emotional control at first. Telling yourself, no, you don't feel X, you feel Y. The time emotional redirection takes decreases until it disappears completely. These emotions allow us to reflect, apologize, listen, process, understand, engage, and believe. Then we can externally respond with appreciation of feedback, admit the mistake, change our racial patterns, focus on the message, not the messenger, build capacity for racial discomfort, and admit we always will have work to do. We must correct our assumptions. You are human. You make 1,000,000 assumptions a day and you don't realize you're doing it. Changing assumptions requires actively seeking knowledge to replace old assumptions with new ones. Assumptions cannot be changed in the moment. In White Fragility, D'Angelo lists 20 new assumptions. The first few are: being good or bad is irrelevant, racism is a cultural system, and we are socialized into racism. These interrupt racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination. D'Angelo lists 10 ways. The first few are: minimize defensiveness, demonstrate vulnerability, and allow for growth. To start, ask yourself, how did I get to the age I am without realizing I hold racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination? That question's answer starts your path. Are you uneducated? Get educated. Are you racially segregated? Meet people of other races. Start actively engaging in behaviors opposite to those that got you where you are. Work to change your emotions, attitudes, and actions.
I feel
A
like
therapist will be more helpful than I am. Watching nearly this entire video is a good start. Now go grab your own copy of White Fragility from the link in the description and read it. I have. 4 times. Use your platform. Everybody has one. Maybe it's the dinner table, a small YouTube channel, a small business, or maybe even millions of people. We all have a platform. Use yours to expand other people's knowledge. Commenting, clicking the thumbs up, subscribing, and sharing the video all get the algorithm to push this video to more viewers, like you, like me, who need this information as badly as you and I do. Work on yourself. Many people of color are dying to be your ally. In customer service training, I mentioned my grandmother had the same pigmentation disorder as Michael Jackson. On a break, a black woman thanked me for saying that. One tiny piece of information showing I understood Jackson had a genetic disorder made this woman my ally. If only I had realized that at the time. I have armed you with knowledge of white fragility. D'Angelo lists positive responses to it. Breathe, listen, reflect, identify the causative assumptions, find someone to help you through your confusion, process your feelings, and then return to the person or people involved in the incident. And never forget that overcoming white fragility is your responsibility. Avoiding it is not the responsibility of the person bringing attention to your racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination. People of color still watching? Thank you. White people still watching? Thank you. Would you mind helping spread the message? Lastly, people of color, I meant it when I said just call me a dumb cracker when you see me do some racist bullshit. Now let's wrap up this video, shall we? Do you think it has not been embarrassing telling you about 50 individual times that I have displayed racist ideologies? It has not. Do you think it has been without risk that I have done this publicly? There's risk. I have family and friends who deeply disagree with what I am saying in this video. I am prepared to suffer whatever consequences I must to share this information because no consequence levied on me will compete to those levied on Emmett Till. They aren't even comparable. But that black friend, he never did have to punch me for saying the N-word. Confronting racism and white supremacy in a racist and white supremacist society is never without personal risk. Don't be a snowflake. Be willing to challenge the system. Be willing to suffer the consequences. In the end, you will sleep better and probably build some authentic friendships with people who wouldn't have given you the time of day before. The only person who can overcome your racism is you. The only time you can overcome it is now. The only way you can do that is to be willing to suffer the consequences. Without Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Emmett Till, Ruby Bridges, and many, many others who all risked and many suffered death, some of which were brutal, we would still be living under de jure racism instead of de facto racism. It is about time that white folks took on the burden of dismantling what other white folks built. If you are not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you next time there's an impossible not to untie.